There are three books in the Bible that have come to be called the wisdom literature: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job.
And all of these books are addressing the same set of questions. What kind of world are we living in? And what does it look like to live well in this world?
So, how to be good at life.
Yeah. So each of these books tackles these questions from a unique perspective. And it's important to understand all of them to get a fully biblical perspective on the good life. So as a thought experiment, you could actually imagine each of these books as a person. So Proverbs would be like this brilliant young teacher, and Ecclesiastes the sharp middle-aged critic, and Job would be this weathered old man who's seen a lot in his day.
We're going to start by meeting the book of Proverbs, the brilliant young teacher. And she's not just smart, she's smart about everything: work, relationships, sex, spirituality. She has incredible insights, things you wouldn't see on your own.
Yeah, she would be the perfect friend to have around when you need really specific advice.
So what makes her so smart?
Well, Proverbs can see things that most people don't see. She believes that there's an invisible creative force in the universe that can guide people in how they should live. And you can't see it, just like you can't see gravity, but it affects everything that we do.
So what's this force?
Well, in Hebrew, it's called chokhmah, and it usually gets translated into English as wisdom. It's an attribute of God that God used to create the world. And chokhmah has been woven into the fabric of things and how they work. So wherever people are making good or just or wise decisions, they're tapping into chokhmah.
And whenever someone's making a bad decision, they're working against Hokmah.
Right, or as it says in Proverbs chapter 1, the waywardness of fools will destroy them, but the one who listens to wisdom lives in security.
So it's like a moral law of the universe.
Yeah, it's a cause-effect pattern, and no one can escape it. And Proverbs personifies all of this as a woman.
Yeah, Lady Wisdom.
Right, and she roams around the earth, calling out, making herself available to anyone who's willing to listen to her and to learn. Which leads to the second thing Proverbs believes, that anyone can access and interact with wisdom and use it to make a beautiful life for yourself or for others.
You can create with it like a designer.
Yes, in fact, chokhmah in Hebrew isn't simply intellectual knowledge. The word is also used to describe a skilled artisan who excels at their craft, like woodworking or stonemasonry. So you show you possess chokhmah when you put it to work and develop the skill of making a good life.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's do this. Let's go find some wisdom.
But before you do, Proverbs has one more really important thing to consider. Chokhmah isn't some impersonal force. It's an attribute of God himself. And so in Hebrew thought, your journey to becoming wise has to begin with what Proverbs calls the fear of the Lord. It's this healthy respect for God's definition of good and evil. And true wisdom means learning those boundary lines and not crossing them.
Now, all those ideas you just unpacked are in chapters 1 through 9 in Proverbs. But when I think of the book of Proverbs, I think of the collection of sayings, the Proverbs themselves. Tell me about those.
Yeah, those are what you find in chapters 10 on to the end of the book. It's a collection of hundreds and hundreds of proverbs about any and all aspects of life. And chokhmah gets applied to them, resulting in this wise guidance to help you find a path towards success, and no matter what you do.
If I design my life with these sayings, life is going to be good.
Yeah, or as Proverbs puts it, it'll give health to your bones, prosperity, a long, rich life.
Which is a really big claim.
But you can see how it's often the case. Wise people, they tend to do better. Things usually work out well for them in life. And so that is the promise and the wisdom of the book of Proverbs.
The book of Proverbs is really beautiful, but if we take a step back, some people would argue it's a little too simplistic, because sometimes horrible things happen to really wise people, and sometimes foolish people get rewarded. It doesn't always work the way we think it should work.
That's right, which is why we need to go and listen to our next wise friend, Ecclesiastes the critic, because he's wrestled with that very problem, and he's going to push us further in our journey to find the good life.
The good life is what we want. Well, first of all, good morning. I wanted to give you an opportunity to get a little exposure to the Bible Project. It's an online option for those of you who want to learn the Bible. Those guys have done a wonderful job in simplifying some pretty complex themes, as well as giving overviews of the different books of the Bible. We specifically chose the book of Proverbs today for a reason, and that is because our prayer in this list of prayers we've been looking at in our Overwhelmed series is the prayer when Solomon actually asked God for wisdom. And the rest, as they say, is history, as Solomon was the one who penned the book of Proverbs and the book of Ecclesiastes, and of course not the book of Job, but those are the three books of wisdom in the Old Testament. Anyway, I would invite you to look at that website and check out the rest of the offerings that they provide us for learning the scripture. But I want to say hey to you here in Victorville, as well as in Phelan and Hesperia and Apple Valley. Thank you all for joining us today for worship at these 4 locations. And now for the next few minutes, we want to look at this last prayer, which is the last edition of our series on the greatest prayers ever prayed. If you did not get a copy of the outline when you walked in, we invite you to raise your hand and someone will find you so that you can fill in some blanks and interact a little bit with the message, maybe learn a little more, take some things home with you in a little while. Each of these prayers that we've looked at over the last few months have been the result of what we could call unexpected problematic situations, or UPS. Now, you're more familiar with the UPS that delivers packages to your doorstep. Keep in mind that the problems of life tend to do the same thing, deliver us to the doorstep of God in prayer. In fact, when you think about it, if it was not for the problem that you faced last, you would not have had as many conversations with God as you've had recently. And that's the nature of life. So good things come out of difficult seasons. And these prayers that have been offered on this list, we've looked at, a number of them over the last couple of months. There have been benefits to these seasons of difficulty. And as these individuals have cried out to God in this moment of feeling overwhelmed, God has responded with direction, with clarity. For Daniel, we learned about the regimen for prayer. Through David, the importance of repenting of our sin. Jehoshaphat's prayer challenged us to rely on God to fight our battles on our behalf. Nehemiah's prayer challenged us to begin a new spiritual initiative. Jesus' prayer challenged us to reconcile our will with the will of the Father. Mary's prayer challenged us to recognize God's grace even in the midst of a difficult situation. And last time we looked at Paul's prayer, the apostle challenged us to do nothing too difficult, but to simply read the Bible. And Solomon's prayer today will challenge us to run our lives on the right fuel. In fact, in many respects, Solomon's prayer we are seeing as a second part to the challenge that began last time with Paul's prayer to read the Bible. So we're in chapter 3 of the book of 1 Kings in the Old Testament. It's page number 511 in my Bible. I don't know if that helps you, but anyway, we'll be looking at the prayer, but also the historical context. There's always a backstory to these prayers, and the same is true here in 1 Kings chapter 3. Verse 1 says, Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married his daughter. He brought her to the city of David until he finished building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. So right here, we know when this prayer took place. It took place during the beginning of Solomon's reign. It was right after he had completed this treaty with the king of Egypt, and as a way of establishing that alliance, the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, gave Solomon one of his daughters as a wife. This is actually the first official interaction between these two nations, the nation of Israel and the nation of Egypt, since the Exodus. So it's been a long time since they've had an official conversation about some order of business. But it also elevates an important couple of points that I want to make as we begin. For the Jewish people to intermarry with pagans, it was looked at dimly through the lens of God. For example, when they entered the Promised Land, they were forbidden in terms of any marriage with the Canaanite nations. And so this marriage between a Jewish king and an Egyptian princess would have certainly raised some eyebrows, even though Egypt was not on the list of Canaanite countries. But I want to talk about that just for a few minutes. I think it's important to clarify some things, especially in light of events that our country is still being forced to contend with, like the one that occurred in Charlottesville last week. And you've heard a lot of people weigh in on that in the media, maybe your friends and your group that you hang around with. There's been a variety of opinions that have been shared, and I just wanted you to see some things through the lens of God, which I guess is my job, to help remind you of what the Bible says. Let me begin by saying this. God's concern for the Jewish people in terms of intermarriage was not because he championed ethnic purity. Neither was it because he had created a pecking order of racial superiority that he wanted to make sure remained intact. Throughout biblical history, the Jewish people always suffered when they confused their role as the chosen people with being superior to other people. They were chosen to fulfill a messianic mission. But God so loved the entire world that he engineered that mission for the Jewish nation in the first place. But God's prohibition against Jewish Canaanite intermarriage was purely out of theological concern. I don't want to sound sexist here, but women tend to be very persuasive. So when you marry the wrong woman, you're in trouble. But I could say the same thing about marrying the wrong guy. You marry the wrong guy, you also could be in trouble. Later in the narrative, Solomon had some problems because of the influence of some of his foreign wives, as they not only came into his palace, but they also imported some pretty jacked up theology and brought it with them. Now, in our context, should your devotion be lessened because you are pursuing or have pursued a particular relationship? If it is because of a love interest that now your interest in God is diluted or lessened, then that is a very bad idea. If you already married a non-believer or someone who has shown a lack of enthusiasm for their walk with God, you made a promise to stick it out, which you should, and we will all be praying with you that your marriage will eventually become a mutual God-honoring relationship. But I want to dig a little deeper here. And before I say what I'm going to say next, I want you to know that I work very hard to keep politics off of the stage. That has been a discouragement to some of you who wish Pastor Tom would have a more vocal political voice. But I represent a very diverse group of political interests in these rooms. Some of you lean to the left, some of you lean to the right. Most of you would like to stand up, sit down, and fight, but that was an old cheer I learned a long time ago when I was in high school. My concern is not for you politically as much as it is for you spiritually. My goal for you is that, number one, you would know God through the only Savior he sent the world, and that you would, number two, start making better choices as you understand his word better. And that is my heart, and that has been my heart for the last 34 years. And so what I want for you are those things, regardless of where you land politically. So what I say today is not through a political lens, it is through a theological lens. But I want to be very clear. Racism at any level is not only evil, it is senseless, and it is heartbreaking. And when Paul wrote the Galatian church, he summed it up very well by saying that there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ. White supremacism is satanic. Any form of race deification, any form of racial discrimination is despicable because it distorts the Christian gospel. And it has historically destroyed every community and every civilization that it has been able to get its filthy hooks into. And that is why we cannot allow that to find root in our community, in our nation, or certainly not at High Desert Church. So if you want, to know what I think about that, there you go. I told my kids when they grew to marrying age, I told them that I would love for them to find a godly, Jesus-honoring spouse. I don't care what color they are, as long as they love God. I don't care whether they root for UCLA or USC. As long as they love Jesus. But anyway, back to our story. So we got this daughter of Pharaoh, right? And by the way, she's never mentioned as a theological concern, so it's very likely that even during the courtship or during that alliance that was arranged between the two kings, maybe shortly after she became Solomon's wife, she probably gave her spiritual allegiance over to Solomon's God. Funny thing is, the Egyptian culture was even more clear about an Egyptian member of a royal family not marrying a non-Egyptian. So, I mean, they were equally as concerned. Anyway, this is just weird at a lot of levels, and it gets weirder. Look at verse 2. The people, however, were still sacrificing at the high places. Now, let me tell you what a high place is. A high place is a place that's high. I don't want you to overthink this, but these people would actually worship on the roof of a house because somehow that was closer to God, or on an elevated mound or platform because that gave them proximity to God. Now, we live in the high desert, so we worship much more effectively than those pagans who have to live in the low desert, right? Because we worship in the high place. Anyway, it's great to be here. But they were worshiping in the high places. Why? Because the temple had not yet been built for the name of the Lord. Now, Solomon will build the temple, but he just hadn't got around to it yet because he's just starting his rule as king of Israel. He showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the instructions given him by his father David, except that he offered sacrifices and burned incense on the high places. The king, look at verse 4, he went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, for that was the most important high place. And Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings. Now, just in case you're keeping score here, that's a lot of animals that are going to die during this season of worship. It was probably a lot of people invited to this worship fest, and it probably lasted a week because that's a lot of animals that gave their lives for this festival. But Jewish law also comes into play with this particular aspect of the story because it told the Jewish people they can't just worship anywhere. The law stated that they would worship at a designated site that God would choose. And those who look at the historicity of the Old Testament believe that that designated site would be the temple. But the temple hadn't been built yet. And so they would find a high place to worship. And of course, Solomon in the most important high place, probably because the tabernacle was there. The tabernacle was the portable version of the temple that God gave the Jewish people during their wilderness wanderings. But I think there is a connection here to us, to our experience in worship. Worship is a lifestyle, and you would tell me that. You would say, I want to live my entire life as an act of worship to God, or a series of acts of worship, and you would be correct in saying that. But I hear people say, because worship is a lifestyle, I can worship God in the mountains. I can worship God at the beach. I don't need to go to a building on a weekend to worship God. And as it is true, you can worship God at the beach, you can worship God in the mountains. There is a certain type of worship. It's a coming to a place worship, to worship kind of worship, if you know what I mean. And in both Testaments, in the Old Testaments, God told the Jewish people, you can't just worship haphazardly. You need to come into community at specific locations in a specific way, in a systematic way, in order to share that community that we have in the New Testament in Christ and hold one another to account. And under the law, they could not just worship anywhere they wanted, even though they could technically worship God everywhere. Under grace in the New Testament, we are told by the writer of Hebrews, do not forsake the assembling of yourselves together as the habit of some is, who just believe they can worship anywhere they want, anytime they want, which you can. But still coming together is important, and Gibeon was the location that was the most important high place in those years prior to the construction of Solomon's temple. And so here we have this party. We have this week-long festival. And at Gibeon, it says in verse 5, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream, and God said, ask for whatever you want me to give you. Boy, wouldn't that be a nice conversation to have with God? You know, God just shows up and pulls you aside and says, listen, I've been keeping my eye on you for a while, and I'm pretty impressed. I will give you anything you ask for right now. So, what would you ask God for? Don't say it out loud, because you're going to feel real unspiritual in a minute when you figure out what Solomon asked for. But what would you ask God for? I mean, all of a sudden you have the opportunity. This is that once in a lifetime genie in the bottle moment. Anything you want, whether he's going to be able to provide for you, finally dig out of that financial mess that you've been in for so long, whether it's that relationship that's been broken that's now going to be restored, whether it's a health issue for yourself or a loved one that you want so badly for healing to take place. And God just shows up and says, anything you want, bro. And Solomon responds. And this is his prayer. This is one of the greatest prayers ever prayed. It's a good prayer. And it's a prayer that you and I can pray too, and should pray. I don't know, God said, Tom, you can have anything you want. I'm not sure I would have responded this way. Not to say I shouldn't. Fill in some blanks. Number one, God, you've already given me more than I deserve. Look at verse 6. Solomon answered, you've shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in his heart. You've continued this great kindness to him, and you've given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. You continue to be faithful to my father David. You continue to give David more than he deserved. And now, look at me. God has given all of us more than we deserve. Can we just say that out loud together? All right? God, you've already given me more than I deserve. You know, all of a sudden, you are setting the platform for a prayer that's so different than most of the prayers that you pray or have prayed to date. Because sometimes we approach God expecting that he gives us what we deserve. Truth is, he's already blessed us beyond what we deserve. Earlier in this series, Pastor Ricky taught us about that moment when Nathan the prophet, you remember Ricky's message, Nathan the prophet approaches King David, Solomon's dad, and he says, you've had an adulterous affair and you got to own this and you got to repent of your sin. David and the woman that he took as his wife in the aftermath of their adultery, Bathsheba, lost a lot because of that immoral liaison that they shared, including the child who was conceived through their adultery. Child died. But while God judges, God also loves to show mercy. And that is what Solomon is recognizing in this prayer. Because a second son would be born to King David and that same Bathsheba. And that son's name would be Solomon, who is now praying this prayer. Solomon could have addressed God this way. He could have said, you know, God, my father murdered my mother's first husband, and then they conceived me. It's a pretty ungodly path that ended up at my cradle, God. But you seem to always find some pretty amazing ways to show your faithfulness to us, even when we are not showing our faithfulness to you. In fact, I love what the psalmist said in Psalm 103, verse 8. He says, "The Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love. He will not always accuse, nor will he harbor his anger forever. He does not treat us as our sins deserve. He does not repay us according to our iniquities." God, you gave my father David more than he deserved. He was a sinful man. You've given me, Solomon speaking, more than I deserve, because who am I to lead this nation at this point in their history? And folks, you and I should say the same thing. God, you've given us more than we deserve. And secondly, fill in some more blanks. God, you've given me an important life assignment that I cannot fulfill in my own strength. We could pray this also, because the important life assignment that he's given us, it's not reigning as king over an entire nation, but God's assignment to us is to be influential in a relational world that he has both supernaturally and strategically built around us. The Greeks called that group an oikos, anywhere from 8 to 15 people right now on the front burner of your life and my life. Different oikos networks, yours certainly different than mine, but that is our mission, that we would discuss faith with them, that we would demonstrate faith for them. I can't do that in my own strength. Neither can you. And certainly neither could Solomon. In verse 7, "Now, Lord my God, you've made your servant king in place of my father David, but I'm only a little child. I don't know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you've chosen. This is a great nation. This is a great people. These people certainly deserve better than me. There's certainly someone more qualified than me. God, why did you choose me to be king?" I can say the same thing every day. Oh, Lord, these people that I love, these people that you've surrounded me with, some of them I'm related to, they certainly deserve better than me. And yet, you have chosen me. I can't do this in my strength. Solomon was 6 years old when his sister Tamar was raped by his older brother Amnon. Solomon was 8 years old when another older brother, Absalom, killed Amnon to avenge their sister. Solomon was 15 years old when Absalom made a play for their father's throne and was killed by a spear while hanging from a tree in the aftermath of that coup attempt. At the age of 19, Solomon's father David arranged for Solomon to be crowned king. Right in the middle of another family fiasco, as yet another older brother, Adonijah, declared himself to be king, trying to pull off another coup and dethrone their father David from the throne. And now Solomon is 20 years old as he takes complete control of the nation's future. I mean, I'm thinking, what kind of a bio do they print at the coronation banquet describing this new king's life? We talk about the royal family and we idolize these children that are raised a royal. We talk about our president and his family and what it must be like for a child to grow up in the White House. What was it like for Solomon? What was he exposed to? All of that family drama, all of that violence, that crippling violence. Can you imagine trying to follow in your father's footsteps and lead an entire nation into their prosperous, hopefully, their prosperous future? But I would say the same thing to us. How can we move forward as leaders in our little worlds that God wants to lead and transform? When we train, and some of you may remember this, we train people to engage those 8 to 15 individuals that make up your oikos, my oikos. We talk about a list a process of engagement. Number one is make a list. Make a list of the 8 to 15 people, because you can't change the world until you frame the world. Who are those 8 to 15 for you? And then the second step on that list is to pray for each and every one of them each and every day. Because this mission that God has given you and I is so far above our pay grade. Oh my. Number 3, fill in another couple of blanks. God, without your wisdom, I will fail. God, without your wisdom, I will fail. Can we say that out loud together as well? God, without your wisdom, I will fail. Turn to the person next to you and say, and so will you. Without God's wisdom, everybody would fail. We need God's wisdom. So what does Solomon say? Okay, that's enough conversation. Now, verse 9, give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? God, if you don't give me the wisdom and the discernment to proceed, to move forward in my life, I'm going to fail. I will most certainly fail, because I cannot influence, I cannot lead, I cannot change without your help. In the midst of this good prayer, we also learn some good theology, some things we learn about God. So we got another little list for you to fill in some blanks about. Number 1, I want you to walk away with clarity. God absolutely loves wisdom. God absolutely loves wisdom. How do I know that? Look at verse 10. The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. That made God very happy, that of all the things Solomon could have asked for, it was this. God said to Solomon, since you've asked for this and not for a long life, a lot of people would have said, Lord, keep me healthy. You haven't asked for wealth. A lot of us would have to say, I admit it, I would ask for money. You haven't even asked for the death of your enemies. And would there be some in these auditoriums who would say, yeah, Pastor Tom, I have to admit, if I'm honest, I'd just be asking God to get rid of those people from my life because they're messing me up. Didn't ask for any of that, Solomon. You asked for discernment in administering justice. You asked for the ability to see through the issues and to ask and to act in a just manner. You know, everybody loves wisdom, but most people just don't know where to get it. If I were to ask you right now, y'all want to be wise? I'd probably say yes. I mean, that'd be kind of foolish to say no, wouldn't it? So where are you going to get it? I love what Solomon, who wrote the book of Proverbs, says later on in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 7. He says, the beginning of wisdom is this. Get some. Though it cost all you have, get understanding. That's pretty impressive. Sell everything you've got right now, all those things that are valuable to you, because there is something that you need more than everything else combined, and that's wisdom. Make sure you get wisdom. So Solomon, how do I get wisdom? Well, all I can say is you need to get some, no matter what it costs you. Last time we talked about a pretty good direction to follow to secure God's wisdom. Call it a good path. Here's a good path to follow from last weekend. Read God's word. God's word is read. Then God's will is revealed. Then God's wisdom is recognized. And then God's Son is reflected. Now that was last time. This is right out of Paul's prayer to the Colossians. But we challenge you to start with step number 1, just read the Bible. You know what? This is learning the Bible. Step number 2 is learning biblical principles, because that's what we get out of the Bible. In fact, that's what we show you. We'll read a passage, we'll teach through a passage, we'll provide a verse, and then after we've read the Word of God, we will try to discern what principles should lead us in our lives that we can learn from that passage. And then we now have the opportunity, understanding those principles, to make choices that are the best choices. And then, of course, the goal is that God's Son would be reflected. I was thinking about this past week, just reflecting on that list again. And 2 decades ago, we identified what the core values for High Desert Church would be. And our 4 core values, those of you who have been to our membership class, maybe you know this or remember this. Those of you who have not been, may not. 4 core values: truthful, helpful, durable, and enjoyable. And then I looked at this path that the Apostle Paul gave us in that light. Truthful, God's word is read. Helpful, we discern principles that can guide us in our life. Durable, because of the choices that we make, now our marriages last longer. Now our relationships with our kids stay healthier longer. Now our ability to explore vocationally the path that God has for us, the trajectory in the workplace begins to be blessed longer and then enjoyable. What could be more fun than reflecting the Son of God and the joy of the Lord in our lives? Truthful, helpful, durable, and enjoyable. And where does it begin? Would you just read the Bible? I don't know how many of you took that to heart this past week. I hope it continues if you did. You know, our word philosophy is a compound Greek word. It comes out of the Greek language, and it combines phileo, which is one of the Greek words for love, phileo, with Sophia. And there might be some people in these rooms named Sophia, which means wisdom. Love, wisdom. Phileo, Sophia, or philosophy. And in the New Testament world, the Greeks loved wisdom. They just loved the wrong kind of wisdom. Greek culture was philosophically divided into little groups. Have you noticed that when you study ancient history, so many of the great philosophers of history came out of the Greek culture? And that's not a coincidence. They had all these little groups of philosophical wisdom. There were as many as 50 different philosophical parties in ancient Greece, and they all had opinions about everything. They would get together and debate regarding politics and regarding society, regarding personal lifestyle. And so when the Corinthians, which was subject to that ancient Greek world of loving wisdom, when they began to meet as a church, the Apostle Paul wrote them a letter, and in chapter 1, at the very beginning of the letter, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, he said, you know, some of you guys in the Corinthian church, you talk like you're part of this philosophical debate team. Some say, I am of Paul, others, I am of Apollos, still others, I am of Peter, and others still, I am of Jesus. And that attitude was promoting their very comfortable belief that different sources of wisdom were equal in value. And you'd get together in church now like you did in the secular environment. And church became like society was. It was like a political convention. And Paul's point is simple. How can we have a political convention when there's only one candidate? Because we don't need just any wisdom. We need God's wisdom. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, that same passage, verse 25, the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom. On your best day, if you're a human, raise your hand, please. Oh, great, okay, you can put your hands down. On your best day, when you have the greatest human wisdom you can muster, it's still dumber than on God's worst day. Not that God is ever foolish, but what Paul's point is that if God were foolish, he'd still be smarter than y'all on your best day. And the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. On your strongest day, you're still weaker than God is when he's weakest. My message, he says in chapter 2, verse 4, my message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words. Paul said, I'm a pastor, I'm an apostle, I got opinions too, but I didn't come to you and try to talk you into what I thought was right. I came with a demonstration of the Spirit's power so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, even my wisdom. Our quest for wisdom begins not with Pastor Tom's opinion, or with your opinion, because my opinion's worth about as much as Paul's was. Wasn't much, evidently. Your opinion's not worth any more. Our quest for wisdom begins in the Scripture, and that's what I want you to do. I want you to know the Bible. That's what I want for our kids at High Desert Church, that they would know the Bible, not just principles out of the Bible, but know where we got the principles. That's what I want for the students at High Desert Church. That's what I want for the adults at High Desert Church. You just know the Bible. If you're not reading the Bible, you have no shot at spiritual wisdom. Let me say that again in case there's any confusion. If you're not reading the Bible, you got no shot. So I guess what I'm saying is check yourself before you wreck yourself, right? You spend buku hours every week checking out your Facebook pages, checking out your Instagram faves, checking out your Pinterest pages, and then you tell me you don't have time to read the Bible. And I say that's stupid. In fact, this is God's Facebook page right here. This is his Instagram page. This is his Pinterest page. You know what y'all ought to do? You ought to follow him. See, I'm not saying that you should. You say, well, Pastor Tom, we follow all of these Christian leaders, all these people who are spokesperson for the Christian faith. Those are the people we follow. And you know what that is? That's a compilation of opinions. At many levels, it's just human wisdom until you go to the source and find out for yourself what he wants to say to you. You follow him instead of the rest of your posse and see how much better your life gets, because it will. We do, however, he says in that passage, speak of wisdom among the mature, but not the wisdom of this age or the rulers of this age, who are coming to nothing. Coming to nothing. Boy, that's a powerful word. In fact, in the Greek, it's, again, a compound word. So many words in the Greek New Testament are compound words. Kata is a prepositional prefix, which means down. Argeo means inactivity, which means we are going down and becoming increasingly inactive. Those who are coming to nothing. In our experience, it would describe disarming a weapon. If the weapon has no ammo, it has come to nothing. There's no value to the weapon. It would be like unplugging an appliance. What value is an appliance if there's no energy source? You unplug it, as beautiful as it is, no matter how much it costs, if you unplug that bad boy, it's not going to do you any good because it has now come to nothing. No benefit. I always look at these words a little bit sideways more than some, and I'm interested in etymology, which is the science or the study of the origin of words and where they came from. And looking at this word, its origin had a connection with nightfall. And in the ancient world, you can see why. In the ancient world, you could work as long as the sun was up. And you could not manufacture light that was sufficient to allow you to continue to work the fields after nightfall. And so at nighttime, your productivity came to a halt. See, that's the value of going a direction that incorporates only human wisdom into whether or not you should make a particular decision. Now later, Proverbs is a book that Solomon would write, as we've already discussed. And he describes in the book of Proverbs the descent of foolishness. How does somebody who is just a good person, we use that term, a good person, just a nice guy, how does somebody become a fool when they start out with so much potential? And Solomon writes in the Proverbs the digression of the foolish heart. In fact, there are different steps, different levels of foolishness that this individual descends into. And as you read through the book of Proverbs, you'll see it kind of evolving throughout the course of the book. For example, these people who had such promise become disarmed of spiritual influence. These people who had such promise become unplugged of spiritual power. And the first step is a simple one. They just stop reading the Bible. The simple fool is gullible. He begins to listen to everybody and everything. He follows everyone, which means he's following no one. The simple believe anything, Solomon says, but the prudent give thought to their steps. And if you remain a simple fool long enough, you become a stupid fool. The stupid fool trusts himself. In chapter 12, verse 15, the way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. You just listen to all of these voices and you come to conclude what you think. Because everybody's opinions have equal value, right? So now I'm going to base my life on what I believe is true. And then the stubborn fool. If you're a stupid fool long enough, you'll become a stubborn one. Stubborn fool refuses to listen to advice. Fools, in verse 16, fools show their annoyance at once. You begin to question that maybe their opinion isn't right, and they get all offended. They get all uptight, and they say, what are you talking about? How could I possibly be wrong here? And if you remain a stubborn fool long enough, you'll become a sarcastic fool. And what does a sarcastic fool do? Disrupts relationships. Drive out the mocker, Solomon says, and out goes the strife. The one who is sarcastic, the mocker, is the one who is instigating quarrels and dividing families, dividing churches, dividing relationships. And if you remain a sarcastic fool sufficiently, you'll become a secular fool. A godless fool. The godless fool worships himself. Chapter 30, if you play the fool long enough and exalt yourself, or if you plan evil, clap your hand over your mouth. It's like one of those, oh my goodness moments. Look what I've become. I've become a godless fool. And where did it all start? Stopped reading the Bible. Stop recognizing the wisdom of God is so much more valuable than the wisdom of others. Another piece of good theology is number 2. God's created order is designed to run on a particular fuel. Creation is a machine. That's what the cosmos is. It was created to function in a machine-like way. And you have many machines in your lives, so you can appreciate what characteristics of a machine might look like, or a list of them. They have a specific design. The cosmos was designed in a very specific way. It has a lot of moving parts. It has different components that function in harmony to ensure optimum efficiency. It was designed with a particular purpose. The cosmos, the universe, had a purpose when it was designed, and it runs best when you feed it a specific fuel. Just like your car. I'm not proud to say it, but I sold one of the greatest cars ever made to purchase one of the top 5 worst cars in American automotive history. I started out at age 16 with a 1969 Mustang Fastback. I was 16 years old. It was the second fastest car at Yucaipa High School. It was a beautiful car. 351 Cleveland engine. Drove it for a few years, and I sold it. And I bought a Chevy Vega. Aluminum block engine. It was a disaster. Its problems, I was reading up on it this week. It says, its problems tarnish both its own as well as General Motors' reputation. You look at the worst cars in America, any of those lists will include, I had a blue one at least, it wasn't orange, so give me some props here. But, and it's not a Ford Chevy thing, because just a few years later, in the mid-70s, the Mustang platform was called the Mustang II. It also made the worst car list in American automotive history. Anyway, it happened almost exactly at 40,000 miles, aluminum block engine, and they told me it would happen because I wasn't the first cowboy in the rodeo, and they said at 40,000 miles you're going to start burning a lot of oil. It was almost exactly like 39,999, almost exactly at 40,000, and every time I took off in first gear, you look out your rearview mirror and you're burning more oil than you're burning fuel, I'm telling you. By the way, Vega is the second brightest star in the northern hemisphere sky, and maybe that's symbolic about the dysfunction that creation has experienced ever since God's wisdom took a back seat, ever since God lost his place at the table in our lives. You remember that decision in the Garden of Eden that was based on human wisdom, and you saw what happened. See, the fuel the universe was built to run on is wisdom, is God's wisdom. And you take that fuel away, and the journey becomes more problematic. In Romans chapter 8, verse 22, the apostle says, we know that the whole creation has been groaning. I just love that. Ever since the fall of mankind, ever since we tended to stop listening to God's wisdom and began listening to ourselves, creation has been compromised, and it just groans. Just looking in its rearview mirror and seeing, oh, that's smoke. Education was supposed to solve our society's problems, but it didn't. Today, we're the most educated generation in American history. We are also the most violent, the most suicidal, the most divorced, and the most divided generation in American history. The United Nations was supposed to resolve the world's crises, but it could not. Two incomes were supposed to provide enough money for your family, but they did not. Technology was supposed to give you more leisure time. Hasn't happened. See, if Solomon is right, and the universe was designed to run on one type of fuel, spiritual wisdom, then everything in our lives works better when we depend on that kind of fuel, rather than when we depend on education, when we depend on politics, when we depend on money and depend on technology. In fact, when God finishes up this conversation in verse 12, he says, "I'll do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be." I can't imagine God saying to me, "Tom, because you asked for wisdom, I'm going to give you the kind of life that no one in the history of mankind will ever be able to compare to." In a way, God still says the same thing, though. In James, he says, "If any of you lacks wisdom," raise your hand, by the way, if you lack wisdom. Thank you. The rest of you are liars. If any of you lacks wisdom, all you have to do is ask God. Just like Solomon, all you have to do is ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault. Why? Because he absolutely loves wisdom. And he loves to give wisdom when we are willing to receive it. And then because you begin running your life on the right fuel, because you begin making the kind of choices that are based on God's wisdom. Where did you get that? Out of those principles. When we learn God's will, where did you find that? Because we just read the Bible. That's where. Moreover, he says in verse 13, "I'll give you what you have not asked for. I'll give you wealth and honor so that in your lifetime you'll have no equal among kings." See, there's a cause and effect relationship between applying wisdom and prospering in life. You guys, you need to connect these dots. This is cause and effect at its best. Apply God's wisdom and enjoy the ride. Look what he promises, sufficient resources. I'm going to give you now, because of your willingness to incorporate my wisdom into your life, God says, I'm going to give you sufficient resources. When was the last time that you qualified your resource level as sufficient? See, it's cause and effect. You apply wisdom in your choices and you prosper in your life. He says, I'm going to give you not only wealth, but also honor. I'm going to give you spiritual authority. People are going to respect you. People are going to want to watch you. People are going to want to listen to you. People are going to want to include you in their lives because now you have a platform. It's not something you developed in your own strength, God says. It's a platform I gave you because you started making choices that were based on God's wisdom. And if you walk in obedience, verse 14, walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as David your father did, I'll give you a long life. Look at this, sustained influence. Those are three qualities that would be very helpful if our job is to change our worlds for Christ. If we have sufficient resources, we have sufficient spiritual authority, and we have a sustained influence over time, because that's what it takes, time, to qualify the kinds of relationships that become influential. Then the world that God has given us can be transformed as well. Let me just close with this, because I know we're running late. You got a list here. And these are the prayers we've looked at. And each and every one of these people were praying to God because of a very unique set of problems. And I don't know what problems you are going to face this week. I assume you're going to face some. I don't know when the next time you are going to feel overwhelmed will be. I assume there will come a time. And you'll be able to look at this list and say, yeah, what I'm going through right now relates more to Nehemiah than any others. Or maybe it relates more to Mary than the rest. Or maybe it relates more to Paul than the rest of this list. But no matter what the problems are, I want you to know something. In fact, Margaret Feinberg put it best, I think, when she said, in the midst of that, always remain suspicious that God is up to something good. Because he always is. And so, Father, I pray that as a result of our engagement to these prayers, that we would be able to proceed in our lives in a manner that is worthy of Christ, that your wisdom would fuel our lives, and that our choices, because they're best, would result in a life that is blessed. And before I let you go, everybody's head bowed and your eyes closed. We do this each weekend. There might be someone in one of these auditoriums that does not know Jesus. And here at High Desert Church, we say A, B, C. You know the drill. The A is admit. The B is believe. The C is choose. Can you admit that your wisdom has resulted in a train wreck? Can you believe that Jesus came to give you a reset? To have the opportunity to connect with God and all that he offers you? And can you believe that Jesus is the one that you must receive into your life? And you do that by choosing to place your faith in him. Not in yourself, not in your friends, not in the culture, but that you would follow Jesus, only Jesus. Admit and believe and choose. And Lord, as we look forward to another week of representing you in our Oikos networks, would we be fueled by your wisdom, and would the ride go well for us this week? In your great name we pray, amen.